In the warm early summer of 1981, a 34-year-old man named Daniel Whitaker arrived alone in Texas Hill Country, a rugged, in the heart of central Texas. Locals remembered that June vividly. The heat had arrived early and refused to leave, thick and dry like a blanket draped over the land. The Llano River shimmered under the relentless sun, glassy and still, while the cedar-covered hills whispered with the soft hum of cicadas. This was the kind of place people came to vanish for a while weather to hike, camp, write, or simply exist without the noise of the outside world. But Daniel Whitaker wasn't a Texan. He came from Boulder, Colorado. He'd recently published an article in Rocky Mountain Living about the healing power of solitude in the wild. Friends described him as thoughtful, calm, and sometimes so deep in his own head he seemed to vanish even in company. He could sit for hours, doing nothing more than listening to the wind move through the trees. According to a gas station clerk in the small town of Mason, Texas, Daniel stopped by on the afternoon of June 4, 1981. He asked for directions to a seldom used trailhead near Hickory Creek, a tributary of the Llano River. He carried maps, two jugs of water, canned food, a large olive-green backpack, and a 35mm Nikon camera slung around his neck. Later that day, he signed in at a ranger station 15 miles west of Llano, where visitors were required to list their name and expected return date. His neat handwriting read, "Name, Daniel Whitaker. Arrival, June 4, 1981. Return, June 8, 1981. Purpose, camping and photography." No one knew then it would be the last time anyone saw him. When June 8 came and went, no alarm bells rang. Daniel lived alone, had no spouse or children, and his work didn't tether him to an office. But by June 12th, his sister, Rebecca Whitaker, began to worry. Daniel had promised to call her after his trip, something he always did after being off-grid. The phone stayed silent. Rebecca contacted the Llano County Sheriff's Department. They checked the ranger station log, confirmed his intended route, and launched a search that same day. A team was assembled tracking dogs, a helicopter, and volunteers from nearby towns. The weather had been clear during his trip. No storms, no flash floods. His brown 1973 Plymouth Valiant was still parked exactly where he'd said it would be, shaded under a cluster of live oaks near the dirt trail entrance. Inside the car was his wallet, tucked into the glove box, a box of developed film rolls, and a half-written journal. The entries brimmed with excitement. He wrote about wanting to get lost in the green silence. But there was no sign of struggle, no panic. No Daniel. The trail he'd chosen was remote, known mostly to hunters and seasoned locals. It wound deep into the Hickory Wilderness, an area without cell service, where parts of the terrain weren't even mapped. Volunteers searched for 4 straight days, calling his name, checking caves and river bends. No body, no gear, no camera, just emptiness. By August 1981, the official report was filed. Daniel Whitaker, missing, presumed dead. The most likely theory, they said, was that he'd fallen into a ravine or dry creek bed, been injured, and died of dehydration before help could find him. But Rebecca refused to believe it. She funded additional searches, printed more than 2,000 flyers with her brother's photograph and the words, "Have you seen this man?" In 1983, a pair of hikers claimed they'd found a tattered olive sleeping bag and a dented cooking pot near a dry creek in an area called Cavern Draw, about 11 miles north of Hickory Creek. But when a search party returned, the site was empty. Whether the hikers had been mistaken or someone had removed the items, no one knew. By 1985, the investigation had gone cold. By 1987, 6 years after Daniel vanished, his story had drifted into local legend. In small towns like into the canyons and never walked out, yet somehow still watched from the shadows. Or maybe a fugitive shelter. It was Texas, after a land with deep, unrecorded history. Officially, though, the case was dead. Daniel's file sat in a metal cabinet in the Llano County Sheriff's Office, marked with a red tab and the single word, inactive. Then, in 1989, a young deputy named Eli Duncan joined the department. Eager and idealistic, Duncan began combing through cold cases in his spare time. Daniel's file caught his attention immediately, the careful journal entries, and the strange fact that a skilled outdoorsman had disappeared so cleanly inland that while remote, wasn't a wilderness. When Duncan asked about reopening the search, his superior shut him down. "That one's done, son. We've got bodies with names to worry about. Whitaker's gone." But Duncan kept digging quietly. In late 1990, Rebecca Whitaker sent the sheriff's office a box of her brother's belongings from Boulder. Among them were 2 undeveloped film rolls and a trail map different from the one found in Daniel's car. This map had red pen markings showing a loop not listed on any official park guide, a set of switchbacks leading to a clearing marked with a bold X dot. Duncan compared it with satellite images. The route led to an elevated ridge overlooking the south fork of Hickory Creek, a place locals called Buzzard's Hollow. It was notorious for steep cliffs and bone-dry air. It was too far off the presumed route Daniel had taken. Duncan requested an official search. He was denied, so, on February 2, 1991, the hand-marked route toward Buzzard's Hollow, 6 hours of grueling climbing, brought them to the plateau. Just past a thicket of mesquite trees, they found something. Half buried in dry soil lay the rusted frame of a portable camp stove, sun-bleached, but intact, exactly the color of Daniel's backpack. But the most haunting find was an old cedar tree. Carved deep into its bark were 3 letters and 4 numbers: DWW 6681, June 6, 1981. 2 days after Daniel had signed into the ranger log, he had been there. No doubt the question that still hangs over Texas Hill Country is, why did no one find this place sooner? It was the summer of 1995, the kind of dry, punishing heat that cracked the earth into patterns like broken porcelain. Even the snakes stayed buried deep in the soil. That year, Hoole County State Park had expanded its boundaries, opening untouched stretches of wilderness to rangers and researchers. This was land that hadn't felt a human footprint in decades. On July 19th, 2 surveyors from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Millie Carter and Victor Hale, were assigned to chart the southern slope of Buzzard's Hollow. Most rangers avoided that area. It was steep, unnervingly quiet, and treacherous with loose rock. Their job that day was purely scientific: track the spread of invasive cedar trees. But what they found had nothing to do with plants. At the base of a jagged rock shelf, under a shaded overhang, they spotted a collapsed tent frame buried under weeds and roots. The site was sealed off, and the Llano County Sheriff's Office was notified. Deputy Eli Duncan, now a 14-year veteran of the department, was the first to arrive. The moment he saw it, he knew: scattered. Across the site were relics from another time. A rusted camp stove identical to one he had found years earlier. A corroded metal cup still perched on a flat stone, as if someone had placed it there and never returned. Shreds of olive-colored the backpack Daniel Whitaker had carried clung to a root system. A broken camera lens lay wedged between 2 stones, buried under a thin layer of dirt. And then there was the notebook, leather-bound, brittle, but still holding together. Scratched faintly into the back cover were the initials D.W.W. No bones. No clothes, no Daniel. The scene looked paused, as if the owner had stepped away with every intention of returning. The notebook was rushed to Austin for forensic preservation. For weeks, specialists carefully separated the fragile pages, piecing together as much handwriting as possible. Most of it was typical Daniel observations of birds, sketches of canyon walls, dated June 6th to June 8th, 1981. Shifted the case into an entirely different realm. June 6th, climbed farther. Then I planned, found a ridge untouched for decades. Strange feeling here, like I'm being watched, just standing. Something isn't right. June 8th, movement at camp before sunrise. The man came closer last night. I didn't imagine it. Tomorrow, I'll leave tomorrow. There were no more entries. ND Journal, its pages yellowed, and its entries dated sporadically. From 1979 to 1984, the handwriting was tight, nervous, and full of angry. Up until that moment, the dominant theory had been an accident, maybe a fall, maybe dehydration, maybe a snake bite. But these final words hinted at something far more disturbing. Daniel had not been alone. Deputy Duncan began combing through old missing person cases from 1980 to 1985 across central Texas. One name stood out: Elias Monroe, a drifter, arrested. In 1979, for trespassing near Llano County, he was known for vanishing into the wilderness for months at a time. In 1981, a sheriff's log noted that Monroe had been spotted barefoot near Hickory Creek. And then, nothing. Monroe was never arrested again. No confirmed sightings. No body. Could Monroe have been the man Daniel saw? Or was it someone else? Entirely a hermit, a fugitive, or something stranger? After news broke of the 1995 campsite discovery, Central Texas erupted in speculation. Headlines asked, "Writer's lost camp found after 14 years, was Daniel Whitaker being watched?" Old rumors resurfaced. A rancher named Henry Mallister, now in his 70s, recalled goats going missing near Buzzards Hollow in the early 80s. He once found animal bones arranged in a circle near a dry creek bed. A former game warden, Travis Bell, told the Llano Gazette that in 1982 he stumbled on a makeshift shelter hidden deep in a gulch lined with animal pelts, stocked with canned food, and covered in strange drawings on the rock walls. He never reported it. It didn't seem criminal, just odd. When he returned months later, the shelter had been burned to the ground. None of these accounts could be tied directly to Daniel, but taken together, they suggested a troubling possibility. Someone had been living in those hills, watching, moving, surviving, maybe even hunting. Theories multiplied. The recluse theory. Daniel had crossed paths with a territorial loner, someone who saw him as a threat and either scared him into fleeing or ensured he never left. The feral man theory, echoing old Texas folklore, this posited that Daniel encountered a mentally unstable man who had abandoned civilization entirely and survived alone for years. The paranoia theory skeptics claimed Daniel's final words reflected heat exhaustion or sleep deprivation. He might have imagined a stalker and gotten lost while trying to escape a danger that wasn't real. Rebecca Whitaker never believed that last one. "My brother wasn't a paranoid man," she told reporters. "He was precise. If he said he saw someone, he saw someone." And her conviction kept the case alive, at least unofficially. In the minds of those who'd been following it since 1981, one piece of evidence from the site had been dismissed at first, the broken 35mm camera lens found near the collapsed tent. But in January 1996, after public pressure, the Texas Department of Public Safety sent the entire camera body lens, and whatever was left of the film, to a lab specializing in salvaging degraded media. It took weeks. The camera's casing was rusted, its internal components fused with corrosion. Moisture damage had glued much of the film together. But in the end, technicians managed to recover 3 frames from the final roll. Frame 1, a wide landscape. Classic Daniel perfect horizon, tree branches framing the shot, golden light spilling across the hills. Nothing unusual. Frame 2, a self-timed portrait. Daniel stands in front of a rock formation, holding the remote shutter in one hand. He isn't smiling. His shoulders are tense. But that wasn't what drew attention. In the background, between 2 trees, stood a figure, barely visible at first glance. A man-slim build, unkempt hair, no visible gear. One shoulder pressed against a tree trunk as if hiding. The angle of his head, the faint glint in his eyes. It looked as though he was staring straight at the camera. Frame 3, damaged beyond recognition, just streaks of light and shadow. That second photograph, grainy, imperfect, but undeniable, pushed the mystery of Daniel Whitaker into a realm from which it has never escaped, because it proved one thing beyond all doubt in those last days of June 1981. Daniel Whitaker wasn't alone. Frame 3 grainy dark and likely snapped by accident under the cover of night. In the bottom corner, just barely visible, a blurred hand reached forward, whose hand it was David Mercer's or someone else's remote. Impossible to determine. Those 3 photographs were enough for former Deputy Alan Harlow to pull the dusty case file from its drawer. They didn't solve the mystery, but they proved something no one could deny. David Mercer had not been alone out there. Despite the renewed attention, the trail went cold almost immediately. The unknown cameraman, the shadowy figure in the trees, and whatever path David had taken, simply dissolved, swallowed by time, wilderness, or human will. No body, no confession, no witnesses. In 1997, David Mercer was declared legally dead, though his mother, Elaine, refused to hold a funeral. She kept three things in her home office: his battered field journal, an enhanced version of that eerie photo, and a map of Pine Hollow pinned to the wall with a single red tack at a place marked Buzzard's Rest. That same year, in an interview with a local station, Elaine said, "Somewhere in those hills, someone knows. Maybe they knew then. And maybe one day, silence won't be enough to keep it hidden." By early 1998, Alan Harlow was no longer a deputy. He'd hung up the badge and was working as a private investigator when he got a call from Bobby Cole, a caretaker on a remote ranch 30 miles southwest of Hickory Creek. The ranch had once belonged to a man named Harold Knoxa, reclusive. Landowner who'd died in 1995, Knox had lived alone on more than 2,000 acres. Much of it pressed against the southern edge of Buzzard's Rest. He was infamous for keeping people off his property by any means necessary. While clearing out Knox's attic, Bobby had found a sealed metal box. Inside was a cracked leather boo. Paranoid ramblings. One entry from June 1981 read, "Saw a stranger on the North Ridge. Not local. Camera around his neck. Don't like it. Don't trust it. Not the first one wandering through here." Another, dated June 9th, 1981, was even shorter. Still no sign of the hiker. Maybe he found what was left. It wasn't signed. But it was chilling. Harlow pushed for a quiet search of Knox's old land. By then, the property had passed to a distant nephew who didn't mind, so long as they stayed away from the livestock fences. On March 28, 1998, Harlow, 2 volunteers, and a cadaver dog hiked into a low, narrow valley that had never been surveyed. What they found there felt like something out of an old campfire story, the remains of a collapsed stone shelter, possibly a hunting hide decades old, scattered bones of deer and goat, some deliberately stacked in triangular formations, and under a rusted sheet of iron nailed into the hillside. A sealed tin box. Inside were 3 things: 2.22 caliber rounds, a faded Polaroid of a rocky ridge, and a necklace, a small silver compass pendant. Elaine Mercer later confirmed the compass belonged to David. "It was a gift from my father." She said, "David never went anywhere without it." Still no body. Still no certainty. But for the first time, they had a link between David and a place far from his last known campsite. In June 1998, advanced touch DNA testing recovered degraded biological residue from the compass hinge. It wasn't enough for a homicide ruling, but partial markers matched David's DNA from a toothbrush his sister had kept. The question became unavoidable. How did the compass get there? Had David fled, been chased, or had someone taken it after? The fact, Harlow dug into Harold Knox's past. What surfaced was unsettling. In the late 70s, Knox had been charged with pointing a rifle at 2 hikers. The charges vanished when both victims refused to return to Texas to testify. Locals claimed Knox talked to shadows, certain that strangers were scouting his land for oil companies or the government. One elderly neighbor claimed Knox had once mentioned burying something near a split rock and a broken cedar, telling him it was to keep secrets safe from thieves. By November 1998, Harlow was back in Buzzard's Rest, 2 days into the southern stretch where Knox's land met public ground. He found it a towering boulder split clean down the middle, likely by lightning. Beneath it, a depression in the dirt had been carefully filled with stones. It took hours to dig out. At the bottom lay a rusted metal ammo box. Inside, a charred, unreadable notebook and a single Polaroid clear and unmistakable David Mercer. Hands behind his back, eyes unfocused, the shot taken at dusk. The trees in the background were unfamiliar. The photo was real. The question was, who took it? The FBI stepped in by early 1999, bringing in Special Agent Teresa Lyle, a forensic image analyst with expertise in wilderness crimes. Under high-resolution scans, she noted 2 things. The lighting and exposure settings indicated someone who knew photography. The photographer had been standing at eye level, less than 10 feet away. Drag marks in the dirt trailed from David's boots, and barely visible in shadow what looked like thin rope around his wrists. It was no longer a missing persons case. By spring 1999, parts of Buzzard's Rest were under quiet surveillance. Harlow believed someone had helped Knox or had taken over the land after his death. Smoke from hidden fires had been spotted from a distance. Hunting cabins miles away were found broken into. One rancher swore he heard a voice deep in the woods shout, "Get off the trail," though no one was ever seen. The land was too wild, too vast. Whoever was out there knew it better than anyone else ever could. Late in 1999, a private hunting lease survey uncovered a buried oil drum sealed with industrial-grade tape. Inside, a cracked, rotted hiking boot. 3 undeveloped rolls of film, a metal canister scratched with the initials D. The film was sent to Quantico. Only 2 frames survived. One a close-up of a journal page not found among David's known writings. The other a blurred image of a fire at night, with a lone figure sitting beside it, too far away to identify. The journal page read, "If someone finds this, I want them to know I tried to leave. I made it to the hollow, but he was faster. I don't know how long I've been here. I hear things moving at night. Sometimes I think I'm already gone." In 2000, the disappearance of Jonathan Crestwell was officially reclassified as a homicide by persons unknown. A memorial service was held in Boulder, where his sister, Melissa, stood at the podium and read passages from his recovered field journal, her voice trembling with emotion. Authorities refused to name a suspect publicly, yet internal memos hinted at one Howard Kell. Those documents suggested Kell had either been directly involved in more, or had at least witnessed the final days of Crestwell's life, and they hinted there may have been others. The land where the mystery began was eventually sold, and the canyon that once echoed with questions fell silent again. Still, hikers who pass Buzzard's Hollow sometimes pause at a cedar tree near the cliff edge. Around its trunk, they stack small circles of stones. 3 letters are carved deep into the bark. JC, his body has never been found. But his story, Jonathan's story, still travels, passed along in forums, in old paperbacks, and in whispered conversations among veteran rangers who know Texas Hill country better than anyone, because some places aren't lost. They're hiding, and some people don't vanish willingly. They vanish because someone is waiting for them. It began in the early summer of 1981. Jonathan Crestwell, 33 years old, drove alone into Texas Hill country, 30,000 square miles of limestone ridges, shadowy canyons, and winding rivers. That June, locals remembered, was suffocatingly hot. The Llano River glimmered under the sun like molten glass, and the cedar-cloaked hills trembled with the endless drone of Cicadas Hill. Country was the kind of place people went to disappear. For a few days to camp, to write, to simply vanish into solitude. Jonathan wasn't a Texan. He came from Boulder, Colorado, where he worked as a freelance nature writer and photographer. Only months before, he had published an essay about the quiet transformations that happen when a person spends time alone. In the wilderness, friends called him thoughtful, unhurried, and someone who could lose hours just listening to the wind. A gas station clerk in Mason, Texas, remembered him clearly. Afternoon of June 4, 1981, Jonathan came in asking for directions to a little-used trailhead near Hickory Creek, a tributary of the Llano River. He had maps, 2-gallon jugs of water, canned food, an olive green backpack, and a Nikon 35mm camera. Slung around his neck at a ranger station 15 miles west of Llano, he signed in as required. His handwriting was meticulous. Name, Jonathan M. Crestwell. Arrival, June 4, 1981. Return, June 8, 1981. Purpose, camping and photography. No one ever saw him again. When June 8 came and went, no alarm was raised. Jonathan lived a Lono spouse. No kids, no office job expecting him back. It wasn't until June 12 that Melissa, his sister, became worried. Jonathan always called her after a trip. This time, the phone stayed silent. She contacted the Llano County Sheriff's Office. Deputies checked the ranger station log and confirmed his intended route. A search team was mobilized that same day. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers from nearby towns. The weather had been stable. No storms, no floods. Jonathan's brown '73 Plymouth Valiant was found exactly where he told the ranger he'd leave. It, under a cluster of live oaks at the dirt trail entrance. Inside his wallet in the glove box, a box of developed photographs, and a journal in which the last entry spoke of being glad to be swallowed by the green silence. There were no signs of distress. The trail he had chosen was obscure, favored only by locals. It cut deep into the Hickory Wilderness, beyond cell range. Through areas where no official map showed every bend or ridge, for 4 days, volunteers, searched calling his name, probing caves, combing riverbanks. No tent, no pack, no camera, only absence. The official August 1981 report labeled him missing, presumed lost. The likeliest theory at the time was a fatal fall into a ravine or a collapse from dehydration. Melissa never accepted that. She raised funds, printed 2,000 flyers across Texas and Colorado. Her brother's face looked out from every telephone pole and store window with the words, "Have you seen this man?" In 1983, 2 hikers claimed they'd found an olive sleeping bag and a dented cooking pot near a dry creek bed in Cavern Draw. 11 miles north of Hickory Creek, by the time a search party arrived, nothing was there. Either the hikers were mistaken or someone had removed the evidence. By 1985, the trail had gone cold. By 1987, 6 years after his disappearance, Jonathan Crestwell's story had settled into local legend. Among rangers, hunters, and guides, whispers grew. Some called him the ghost hiker, still walking the canyons unseen. Others murmured he had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have: a smuggler's hideout, an old moonshiner's route, or a secret shelter for fugitives. But in the Llano Sheriff's office, his file sat in a gray metal cabinet with a red tab, marked inactive. Then, in 1989, a young deputy named Colton Myers joined the department. Eager and curious, he dug into old cases and found Jonathan's file. It gnawed at him: the precision of the journal, the absence of gear, the strange fact that an experienced outdoorsman could vanish so completely in terrain that, while remote, was no Alaskan wilderness. Colton asked to reopen the search. His superior shut him down. "That one's done, son. We got bodies with names on them. Crestwell's gone." Still, Colton quietly kept working. In late 1990, Melissa sent a box of Jonathan's belongings from Boulder to the sheriff's office. Inside were 2 undeveloped film rolls and a second trail map one never found in his car. This map had red ink markings, a loop not shown on official park charts, a series of tight switchbacks, and a clearing marked with an X. Cross-checking satellite images, Colton saw it led to a ridge above the South Fork of Hickory Creek, a place locals called Buzzard's Hollow. Sheer drops, dry air. No 1981 search party had ever reached it. Colton requested a formal search. Denied again. So on February 2, 1991, he went anyway, bringing only his cousin, a seasoned local guide named Wesley Calder. The 2 men hiked toward Buzzard's Hollow, following the same red ink path Jonathan had once marked. After 6 grueling hours of climbing, they finally reached the plateau, just beyond a small grove of mesquite trees. They saw it something out of place. Half buried in the cracked soil lay the rusted frame of a portable camp stove, choked by leaves and bits of limestone. A few steps away, a scrap of faded olive-green fabric clung stubbornly beneath a boulder. It matched the type of backpack that Daniel Rivers had once carried. But the thing that stopped Detective Cole Maddox in his tracks was a cedar truncheon, weathered, with deep carvings in its bark. 3 letters and a date, still legible after years of wind and rain: DRR 6681. June 6th, 2 days after Daniel had signed the ranger log. There was no doubt he had been here. June 7th, saw a man this morning, didn't wave back. He stood above the ridge, not a hiker, no gear, just standing. Something's wrong. June 8th, moving camp at first light. I can't sleep. The man came closer last night. I didn't imagine it. He stood near the trees for hours. I packed, but I'm too tired to walk in the dark. Tomorrow, I leave. There were no more entries up until then. Every theory had pointed to an accident heat stroke, a fall, a snake bite. But now there was the possibility of another person, someone who had been in those hills, deliberately avoiding contact. Maddox combed through every missing person. Report from 1980 to 1985. One stood out: Elias Monroe, a drifter arrested in 1979 for trespassing on private land, known to live alone in the wilderness for months at a time. Monroe had a documented history of mental illness. In 1981, an old sheriff's log recorded him wandering barefoot near Hickory Creek. By 1982, he had disappeared entirely. No arrest records, no sightings, no body. Was Monroe the man Daniel saw? Or someone else, entirely a hermit, a fugitive, a predator? The hill country had always hidden its secrets well. When news broke of the 1995 rediscovery, local papers blared. Headlines like, "Lost Writers Camp Found After 14 Years, Was He Being Watched?" Old rumors resurfaced. Henry Collister, a rancher in his 70s, claimed that in the early 80s, several of his goats had vanished near Raven's Hollow. Once he had found animal bones arranged in a circle by a dry creek bed. A former game warden, Travis Bell, told the Hill Gazette that in 1982 he stumbled upon a hidden shelter deep in a gulch animal pelts, canned food, and crude drawings on stone walls. He hadn't reported it because it seemed odd, not criminal. When he returned months later, it was gone, burned to the ground. Nothing came of these leads, but together they hinted at an unsettling possibility. Someone had been living out there, watching, moving, surviving. Some believed Daniel had encountered a territorial recluse who forced him to flee or silenced him. Others whispered about the feral man, legendan, unhinged figure who had abandoned society. Living off the land in secrecy, skeptics argued it was nothing more than heat-induced paranoia. That Daniel's exhaustion had twisted his senses, causing him to flee from a threat that didn't exist until he fell or became lost. But Margaret Rivers, Daniel's sister, rejected that outright. "My brother was not paranoid," she said. "If he wrote that someone was there, then someone was there." Her conviction kept the case alive in the hearts of those who had followed it from the start. Among the recovered items, one had seemed too damaged to matter: that broken 35mm camera lens, buried near the tent. But in January 1996, after public pressure mounted, the Texas Department of Public Safety sent the camera body, lens, and what was left of the film spool to a lab specializing in salvaging degraded media. What they found inside would reopen every question it had taken. Weeks of painstaking work, the old camera's metal casing was riddled with corrosion, and moisture had welded parts of the film into a sticky, fragile clump. But the technicians didn't give up. They managed to pull 3 frames from the final roll. The images were far from perfect, grainy, streaked with light leaks, and scarred by time, but what they revealed would spark the mystery all over again. Frame 1 was a classic landscape, unmistakably in Alan Brooks's style, the horizon perfectly balanced. Tree branches framing the sky, golden hour light spilling. Across the hills, peaceful, ordinary, nothing to raise an eyebrow. Frame 2 was different. It was a self-timer, Chatelain, standing before a jagged rock formation, the remote shutter in his hand. He wasn't smiling. His stance was rigid, almost wary, but the real detail wasn't him. Between 2 trees in the background, just far enough to be hard to notice, stood a figure. Still, watching Dot zooming in revealed a man, slim build, hair tangled and unkempt, no backpack or gear in sight. One shoulder pressed against a tree, as if using it for cover. His eyes caught just enough light to glint at the camera, like he knew it was there. Frame 3 was nearly unreadable, dark, blurred, maybe taken by accident in the dead of night. But in the lower corner, faint and smeared by motion, was the outline of a hand reaching forward. Whether it was Alan's or someone else's couldn't be determined. The 3 photographs were enough for former Deputy Mark Donovan to reopen the cold case. They proved one thing: Alan Brooks had not been alone in those hills. The renewed investigation stirred interest, but no fresh evidence emerged. The stranger in the trees, the faint hand, and Alan's trail had been swallowed by the wild, by time, or perhaps by someone's intent. No body, no confession, no witnesses. In 1997, Alan Brooks was declared legally dead. His sister Claire refused to hold a funeral. She kept his weathered journal, the enhanced photo of the second frame, and a map of hill country pinned to her wall with a single red marker at Buzzard's Hollow. In an interview that year, she said quietly, "Somewhere out there, someone knows. And someday, maybe silence won't be enough to keep it buried." Early in 1998, Mark Donovan, no longer a deputy, now a private investigator, received an unexpected phone call. The caller was Bobby Hale, caretaker of a property 30 miles southwest of Hickory Creek, near Junction, Texas. Bobby had been clearing the attic of an old ranch house that once belonged to Harold Nunn, a reclusive landowner who had died in 1995. Nunn had lived alone, fiercely protective of his 2,000 acres. Bordering the southern edge of Buzzard's Hollow, Locals remembered his warning signs, his locked gates, and the stories of how he'd run trespassers off with a shotgun in hand in a sealed metal box. Bobby found a leather-bound journal sporadic entries spanning 1979 to 1984, written in tight, almost angry cursive. The tone was paranoid, distrustful. One entry from June 1981 read, "Saw a stranger in the northern ridge. Not local, camera around his neck. Don't like it, don't trust it. Not the first one wandering through here." Another, dated June 9th, 1981, simply stated, "Still no sign of the hiker. Maybe he found what was left." It wasn't signed, but the words were chilling. Donovan pushed for permission to search Nunn's former land. By then, it had passed to a distant nephew, who agreed so long as they stayed away from the livestock enclosures. On March 28, 1998, Donovan set out with 2 volunteers and a cadaver dog into a secluded valley that had never been formally surveyed. What they found was strange. A collapsed stone structure, possibly a hunting shelter, decades old, lay hidden in the brush. Scattered around were animal bones, likely deer and goat, some deliberately stacked into triangular arrangements. Beneath a rusted iron panel nailed into the hillside, they uncovered a sealed tin box. Inside were 2.22 caliber rounds, a faded Polaroid of a distant ridge, its date unreadable, and an Eclesa, small silver compass pendant. When Claire saw the compass, she recognized it instantly. "It was a gift from our father," she said. Alan wore it on every single trip. There was still no body, no undeniable evidence of a crime. But now the valley was officially a crime scene. In June 1998, forensic specialists managed to extract degraded DNA from the tiny hinge of the compass using advanced touch DNA techniques. The partial genetic markers matched a sample taken from Alan's toothbrush years earlier. It wasn't enough to legally rule his death a homicide, but it proved something he had worn ended up far from his last known campsite. How did it get there? Did Alan run? Was he pursued? Or did someone take it from him? No answer emerged. Donovan began digging deeper into Harold Nunn's past. In the late 1970s, Nunn had been arrested for brandishing a rifle at 2 hikers. The charges vanished after both men refused to return to Texas to testify. Locals said Nunn was unstable, known to mutter to shadows, and convinced strangers were spying on his land for oil companies or the government. One rumor claimed Nunn had buried something near a dry gulch, telling a neighbor he was keeping secrets safe from thieves. That neighbor, now 81 and living in Kerrville, confirmed the tale. He added that Nunn had once sketched a crude map on a napkin, marking a spot near a broken cedar and a split rock. Donovan took the lead, the old clue burning in his mind. Somewhere in those hills, under decades of dirt and silence, he believed the rest of the truth still waited. In November of 1998, Ethan Carver returned to Ravens Hollow. This time, he came in from the southern ridges, where the late Conrad Vaught land met the edge of public forest. For 2 relentless days, he pushed through underbrush and frozen creek beds, following nothing but instinct. On the second evening, he found it, a colossal boulder, split clean down the middle, as if some ancient lightning bolt had torn it in 2. Beneath the shadow of its jagged edges was a shallow depression littered with stones, not scattered, stacked, deliberately by hand. It took Ethan hours, his fingers raw and bleeding, to pull away the last of them. At the bottom lay a metal ammunition box, rust welded shut. He pried it open with a hunting knife, the hinges groaning as if waking from a decades-long sleep. Inside, a notebook burned along its edges, pages warped beyond recognition, and one other thing, a Polaroid photograph. This one was sharp, crystal clear. It showed Daniel Whitford. His posture was rigid, hands pinned behind his back, his gaze slightly unfocused. The photograph had been taken at dusk. The trees behind him were dark strangers to Ethan's eyes, woods he didn't recognize. The image was real. Too real. But the question gnawed at Ethan, who had taken it. The second Polaroid was the most direct piece of evidence yet that another presence had been there. Someone had been with Daniel. Someone had control. By early 1999, the FBI was back on the case. Special Agent Clarissa Vane, a forensic image analyst, known for her work in remote wilderness crime scenes, studied the photo under high-resolution scans. Her observations chilled the room. The lighting and exposure weren't accidental. They were deliberate, the work of someone who understood photography. The angle suggested the photographer stood at eye level, no more than 10 feet from Daniel. In the dirt near his boots, faint but unmistakable, were drag marks. And when Clarissa enhanced the shadows at Daniel's wrists, the truth emerged: rope, barely visible, binding him. This was no longer a missing person case. It was something much worse. By spring, the area around Ravens Hollow was under discreet surveillance. Ethan, now unofficially assisting federal agents, was convinced someone had either aided Conrad Voss or continued his ways long after his death. More than once, faint trails of smoke had been spotted curling above the distant treetops. Old hunting cabins, deep in the valleys, were found broken in two-food, missing bedding stripped. In March, a rancher reported hearing a voice shout from somewhere in the thick of the woods, "Get off the trail!" He'd seen no one, and yet the sound was close. Almost too close. The land was a maze impossible to truly search, its hills and ravines a perfect refuge for anyone who knew them. Whoever had been living out there, if they still were, had an intimate knowledge no outsider could match. Months passed, no arrests, no witnesses, and the Hollow kept its silence. In late 1999, a private hunting lease was surveyed along the southwestern border of Voss's property. Workers digging near a low ridge struck something solid. Buried beneath the clay was an oil drum, sealed tight with layers of industrial-grade tape. Inside, a torn tarp, a single hiking boot cracked and dry-rotted, 3 rolls of undeveloped 35mm film, and a small metal canister, scratched with the initials DWL. The film was rushed to Quantico. Only 2 frames survived the years. The first, a close-up of a handwritten journal page, one not belonging to Daniel's known diaries, the second, a blurred image of a campfire at night. A lone figure sitting beside it, hunched face swallowed. In shadow, the journal page read, "If someone finds this, I want them to know I tried to leave. I made it to the Hollow, but he was faster. I don't know how long I've been here. I hear things moving at night. Sometimes I think I'm already gone." By 2000, the case of Daniel Whitford was officially declared a homicide. The perpetrator or perpetrators unknown. That summer, a memorial service was held in Boulder. Daniel's sister, Elise, read from the recovered pages, her voice breaking. With every sentence, the authorities, when pressed, would not name a suspect publicly. But within sealed reports, the same name came up again and again: Conrad Voss. Investigators believed he had either taken part in or witnessed the last days of Daniel's life. And perhaps, they suspected, others had helped him. The land changed. Hands the canyon quieted, yet hikers still come. They leave stones near the edge of Ravens Hollow, stacking them into careful little towers around a cedar tree, where 3 carved letters catch the fading light. D.W.2 this day. Daniel Whitford's body has never been recovered. His story drifts through internet forums, creeps into late-night radio programs, and lingers in the hushed conversations of veteran rangers who know the hill country better than anyone. Some places are not lost. They are hiding, and some people do not vanish because they choose to. They vanish because someone is waiting for them.